My name is Brittany Smith, and I would like to welcome you to my website, Hard Reporting. I'm introducing to you a campaign for the very first time. It's called eRACism. And it's a pun, it's a play on words that a friend of mine ambitiously and cleverly made up. So thank her, thank her. Her name is Renisha Bishop. You also see her name in the credits once you press play on the video below me. But I wanted to take the opportunity to kind of walk you through the narrative argument that I'm trying to make for and against, actually, more so an exploration of affirmative action more so than a partisan argument for or against affirmative action. In the first video that you'll see is one by a white female named Mackenzie. Mackenzie is a sophomore student from Saginaw, from the west side of the community, and she talks about an experience that she had in her sophomore year of high school when it seems as though she realizes for the very first time that we being, because she's speaking in a white-black binary terms, because she talks about black people being predominantly on the east side of town and white people being predominantly on the west side of town. And she recalls from memory in a way that's very honest, I might say. You can see this because I think she does this in a way that I think she forgets the cameras are on. But she recalls for us the moment in which she realizes that black people and white people, specifically in the social context of Saginaw, are living, breathing, and seeing in the very same world. And she does this in a way that's particularly powerful. One, not only because she does so forgetting that the cameras are on her, and you can see that in her behavioral mannerisms, the way she nervously folds her hands, the way she grips her hands, and she's kind of playing with her hands, tooling with her thumbs, so to speak. And she's looking down, and she's searching for words, and she's talking to us. The shot that you'll see is when she's talking to us about how during this sophomore year in high school that she is beginning to politically find her independence, independent from her peers, and independent from the teachings and values of her family, in which case she was always taught to believe that black people were marginal to her. And so the way she does this is in a way that I think is particularly captivating and moving, because she puts herself in the shoes of a black female from the east side of town, and when she's doing this, she's trying to imagine the way she envisions herself as a white female juxtaposed to the way that a black female in the same age bracket sees her. And again, like I said, it's very honest. It's very honest, and it's very engaging the way she does this. Moving forward, in the second clip, you'll see me interview Ariane Abraham, black female from Chicago, Alan Sabrick, white male from Detroit, and Laura Washington, white female from Detroit as well. But what they do is that when they talk about affirmative action, the way they understand it and the way they see themselves in this whole affirmative action debate, is done so in a way that is kind of contradictory. If you look at, for instance, if you listen to Ariane's narrative, you listen to her story. She's black, right? But yet she went to a very prestigious and esteemed high school, right? But that's usually when you hear, and she goes to University of Michigan, at a public, state institution, very much high ranked. And then you hear the story of Alan Sabrick, who tells us that he comes from a low income white immigrant first generation family who went to Detroit Public School High School, magnet school nonetheless, but he tells us that this magnet school did not prepare him for the rigor initially for the curriculum of the University of Michigan. And then you hear from Laura Washington, also white female, grew up in a home that where both her parents are highly educated, both professionals. But she went to a public school, Detroit Public School. She went to Renaissance, also magnet school. And so when you hear their stories, you see the diversity in opinion, you see the diversity of representation in which people identify and explain affirmative action. And when you hear Alan Sabrick's narrative, it changes the conversation, and it changes the demonstration in which we think about affirmative action and how we think who it benefits and who we think about who's integrated into this debate around affirmative action. And so I think it's particularly significant because if we're going to engage the wider public about affirmative action, I think it's very important to hear stories like Ariam, stories like Alan, who identifies to us that he is handicapped and he's in a wheelchair, but he's a white male, but he's an immigrant, but he went to Detroit Public School High School, but he doesn't feel that he was adequately prepared for the rigor of University of Michigan, yet and still he's very honest about having white male privilege. Then you hear about Laura Washington, and like her, like Mackenzie, they have this consciousness where they are allied with this movement of affirmative action. Not only are they feel allied to marginalized communities because they don't self-identify as being a part of a marginalized community, not necessarily in this video anyway, but they also make it very clear that if we're going to have a national, we're going to change the national image around affirmative action and the way we understand it specific to the University of Michigan, we need allies. We need to hear the anecdotal stories of maybe the first generation black student who came from the projects, or the first generation student who came from Mexican town, Puerto Rico, or who's Mexican or who's Puerto Rican and pull themselves, quote unquote, by the bootstraps and find themselves on in the ivory tower. But it's also important to hear the contradictory nature, I guess you could say, of affirmative action and the way we understand it, and the way it is being understood on the ground, and the way legislative opinion understands affirmative action, and then also the way the national public discourse understands affirmative action. And then finally, particularly as we analyze our potential audience, which I presume will be University of Michigan administration officials, as well as students and faculty members, but also the wider public body politic outside of the state of Michigan, I think is really important, especially given have this conversation about affirmative action at the University of Michigan, because I think oftentimes what you'll see through different literature is that you'll see, usually when you're talking about affirmative action in this country, you'll see it, the national byline will be affirmative action, comma, University of Michigan, or affirmative action, comma, UC public school system. When really it's not about that. When really affirmative action is a legislative opinion that you'll see throughout my website. Once you go throughout the political impressions link, you'll see that it affects the wider public. It just doesn't affect the University of Michigan, and it wasn't established with the University of Michigan specifically in mind. Instead, it was established for, again, the wider American constituency in mind. And when you hear and read and you listen, right, to the historical precedents of affirmative action, you kind of see how affirmative action is remembered in history and how we engage with it. And I think it's particularly crucial to have this conversation at the University of Michigan, where you'll see statistical data that shows that, in terms of underrepresented minorities, which I hate that term, but in terms of underrepresented minority representation at the University of Michigan, in terms of graduate and undergraduate enrollment, it has steadily increased within the past 10 years, right? But yet, and still, when you look at Michigan State, for instance, or Eastern Michigan, there doesn't seem to be that same statistical regression, as it is at the University of Michigan. So, in terms of people of color being represented in their university enrollment numbers. So, what it seems to be is that people associate this debate with affirmative action with the University of Michigan, when really affirmative action being disbanded or being debated affects the wider state. But what is notable is that University of Michigan, until I see differently, was the only university in the state of Michigan that believed in affirmative action, so much so that they extended their argument all the way to the Supreme Court. That is what distinguishes the University of Michigan from all the other universities at the state of Michigan. But what it seems to be the oxymoron is that though the University of Michigan was the only school that defended affirmative action all the way to the Supreme Court, somehow it seems that the University of Michigan, in terms of enrollment, is being vindicated in ways that other state universities in the state aren't in terms of enrollment. So pay attention to that. And like I said, that's particularly significant and is worth analyzing, and I think is worth engaging with. So I hope you enjoy my website, and I look forward to hearing all your opinions, comments in the months and weeks to come. Thanks. I hope you enjoy.